Good morning and welcome to our Sunday reflection for the 21st of March. The text today is John 12:20 to 33. And if you want to, we can read that together now. If you want to just press pause and grab your Bibles. So verse 20. Now among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honour. Now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. It is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven. "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing there heard it and said that it was thunder. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. Before I began my nurse training in the mid-90s, and then later moving on to my ministerial preparation, before all of that, I used to work as a groundsman on a big old mental health hospital estate called St Crispin's Hospital in Northampton. When I first went to work there, the place was gradually being run into the ground as care in the community was gathering pace. Yet despite the fact that there was this air of neglect and that many of the buildings were slowly falling into decay, the whole place still had a very forbidding, rather impressing aspect. So much so that when the Doctor Who producers back in the 70s were looking for a creepy Victorian institution as a movie set, they chose St Crispin's. Now, rising above this sprawling behemoth of the building was this rather imposing tower, the clock tower, and it was certainly the most distinctive feature of the whole estate. It seemed to draw the eye, as though rolling all beneath it. Certainly going there as a 17-year-old, it left me completely entranced. And although that big estate was over 360 acres in size, it didn't matter where you were. I could be digging a ditch on the perimeter, cutting off the bough of one of the horse chestnut trees by the side of the big drive, or down on the cricket field, walking up and down and mowing the cricket square. All I'd have to do is look across, and there would be the clock. Also, no matter where you were, you would always be within earshot of its rather solemn sounding strike, as it kept track of the half hour or the hour. Now, I've always had a bit of a fanciful imagination, but to me, every single time I heard it, it didn't sound like it was simply telling the time, but rather like it was now announcing a really important, rather momentous occasion. The kind of timepiece, perhaps, with the necessary gravitas to accompany the words of Jesus today when he said, "Now my hour has come." We're now in the final days of Jesus' ministry, indeed his life. He's come to Jerusalem to celebrate with 2.5 million or so of his fellow believers. He's come to celebrate this annual commemoration, this Passover festival. There are lots of Jews from all over the known world who have come to celebrate. But there are also lots of Gentiles too, foreign believers in Yahweh. And we come across some of these believers in our text today. They're seeking to meet with Jesus. They need his help. We gather they've heard about his teaching. They've heard about his miracles. They go to Philip. One commentator suggested that perhaps they chose Philip because he's the only disciple with a Gentile name, with a Greek name. But Philip, for whatever reason, doesn't feel confident about making the decision by himself. Maybe Jesus is very tired. Maybe he's had an exhausting day. Instead, he goes to consult with Andrew. When Andrew does a very Andrew-like thing, he instantly goes to arrange a meeting. Whenever we see Andrew in the Gospels, that's what he's doing. He connects people with Jesus. Now, we don't see this meeting recorded for us. We don't get to witness it, which doesn't mean to say that it doesn't happen. But on being told that Greeks had come to talk to him, Jesus seems to be prompted to reveal something extremely important. It was like a great big celestial clock tower was suddenly striking the hour. And it triggered a rather momentous saying. Jesus said, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified." Now, this is really significant, and it must have struck the disciples as significant too, because up until this point, Jesus had constantly been saying at various points, "No, the time's not right. The hour hasn't come. I can't fully reveal myself yet." We saw that in Cana at the wedding where he turned water into wine. When he was first asked to help, he said, "No, my hour hasn't come yet." We also saw it in John 7. This was another Passover festival when Jesus declined to go up Jerusalem because he knew that by going to Jerusalem, he would be fully revealed. "My hour hasn't come yet," he said. And on another occasion, this was in John 8, we hear of a rising persecution against Jesus by many of the authorities. They tried to kill him, in fact, a group of people. And we read that no man laid hands on him to arrest him because his hour had not yet come. So, in response to the news that some Greek strangers had come along to have a bit of a chat with him, he's saying, "Now my hour has come." Imagine the amazement of his disciples. The time has come for me to be glorified. Even now, despite all his explanations, he's been telling them again and again and again what it will be like at the end, how the Son of Man must die, how there will be a humiliation, a necessary humiliation. Even now, the disciples still don't really understand what Jesus means by being glorified at this stage. To him, for them, they probably had images of military conquest, angel armies coming down, perhaps the Romans and many of the religious authorities being sorted out. Many of us screaming, praising people as Jesus went up the road to Jerusalem on the day we now describe as Palm Day. Many of the people would have had the same image in their minds. Here comes Jesus, here comes that famous miracle maker. He's going to sort out those Gentile enemies. He's going to give us our freedom, our independence again. But the only mental image that Jesus had in his mind at this time was an old wooden cross. That's the first century equivalent for us of the gallows or an electric chair. So he had been walking in the shadow of the cross for 3 years. I suppose you could argue it was actually 33 years. And now finally, Jesus had reached the foot of the cross. And the cosmic clock chimes. When a clock strikes, they grab our attention. I suppose they're designed to do that, whether it's a big, imposing clock like the clock tower in St. Crispin's, or a venerable old grandfather clock in someone's home. They're chiming Their striking seems to say, pay attention. And in the same fashion, Jesus has some momentous words to accompany the metaphorical striking of God's clock. The hour has come. I love the poetic language of the old King James Version of the Bible. I don't read it for my study because many of the words aren't relevant now, but I still enjoy the beauty of it, the poetic beauty. And in the King James Version of this particular text, Jesus is saying, verily, verily. In my modern translation, it's truly, truly. In other words, you need to pay attention. This is important. So, okay, we're listening. What's he saying to us? But actually, what he's saying to us actually sounds very odd indeed, because in verse 24, he's effectively saying that life comes through death. Doesn't make a lot of sense at first. Dying to live? Death brings life? What kind of a weird paradox is Jesus presenting here? Now, his disciples would have been confused, but Jesus, typically to him, brings a very simple everyday illustration as a way of making it clearer. He says, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. Until the seed dies to that current form and goes into the ground and then grows into something different, we can't have the wonderful wheat that can then be ground and turned into bread. And he's saying it's the same for human beings. So this life feels so precious, this body, all that I have around me, all that I see and feel and experience through my senses. For many of us, losing that is literally the greatest lot there can be. But Jesus is saying that's not the case. Literally, this is just the beginning. It's literally the seed form, like the seed, that grain of wheat that will grow into something more, a much fuller life. And the Christian hope is all about the resurrection to come, that fuller life. But there is no resurrection, there's no end to death, no end to despair and pain until we have the first death. That is Jesus' death, and the hour has come. So Jesus' death on the cross, his being buried for those 3 days, if you like, in the tomb before he re-emerges, would bring the hope that is currently lodged in the heart of a small nation, Israel. By being resurrected to life, Jesus is enabling that growth, that hope to become a harvest that covers the whole world. So it's exciting looking at the bigger picture, thinking of this worldwide harvest, but let's bring it back to the personal a moment. Viewing ourselves as a seed or as a shadow of something to come, how does that change our perception of the world? Well, speaking for myself, I think it stops me taking myself too seriously. It also kind of flies in the face of culture. Our culture looks to celebrate the physical. Youth is like a cult. We spend billions of pounds every year across the world trying to look as young as we possibly can, fighting against effects of aging, getting as much stuff as we can. Somebody once said that living as though now was all there is a bit like getting a little grain, a little seed of wheat, putting it in the baker's window and expecting people to be attracted by it. But of course they're not. They want to see the loaf, not the seed. And sometimes we can forget that, we're not all we can be. We need to die to self and live for Christ. It's looking beyond the grain to the loaf to come. In Galatians 2:20, Paul wrote, "Life can never be fulfilled unless we die to self so we can live to God." We can't grow and reach fulfillment if we're refusing to stop being that little seed, if we're refusing to die to self. And I think that attitude can affect every single decision we make, how we spend our money, how and who we prioritize, whether to self-sacrifice or self-satisfy. When I was training to be a Baptist minister, we were sent out by the college to go to various churches in different contexts across Wales to sharpen up our preaching skills. One Sunday I was sent to this church on a big council housing estate in Swansea. I found the estate easily enough, but then finding the church was very difficult because all the houses looked almost identical and there are very few landmarks. It was a bleak November's evening. It wasn't the most appealing of places to be. And when I finally found the church, it was even less appealing than the estate it was on. It was a 60s concrete block with wire mesh over its windows. It looked more like a place of incarceration than a house of worship. But there it was. The congregation inside was tiny. There was about 8 people there. Di and his wife, they pastored the church and they took me back to their house afterwards. Actually, it was a lovely congregation and they were a lovely couple. And they were telling me afterwards a little bit about their calling to this particular estate. Di said that the church couldn't afford to pay him. He had a fairly decent occupational pension, so that helped. He also supplemented his income by working as a delivery driver for Tesco's. His ministry was less about what he did in church, because not many people came to his church, and more about what he could do on the estate around him. He didn't do big programs or community outreaches or anything like that. A lot of it was just very pastoral. He would visit the people who wanted to be visited. He started to build up a reputation for doing the odd jobs that folks needed, especially people who couldn't do it themselves, like disabled people. Or one particular mum, she was a single mum of 5 children who just didn't have the time. So Di and his wife would go along and help out. The church wasn't growing. The people he helped didn't come into his congregation, although many did reach out for him for spiritual counsel. And he said he was often tempted to speak to Mark Owen at the BUW and ask for a bigger, a more resourced church, perhaps one that could pay him, one that was in a slightly more encouraging area. Sometimes he admitted that he felt like a bit of a failure. My church isn't growing, he'd say in his prayers. Lord, am I in the wrong place? Am I the wrong person for it? But he said whenever he did pray about this earnestly, he felt God saying to him, stay where you are. Your service is pleasing to me. So the fruit of his ministry couldn't be counted by bums on pews, which is often the typical way that we count success in church life. I'm not saying that's a good way of counting success, but it's a very literal, easy way. However, I suspect that God was keeping account of the fruit that Di was producing in a very different way, the lives he touched. And I suppose as I was driving home from Swansea to Pembrokeshire that evening, I wondered just how many lives Di had touched, how many kingdom seeds had been planted. And perhaps Di wouldn't have the honour or the privilege of actually harvesting them. Maybe that would be for somebody else, but Di was faithfully, unglamorously planting the seeds in love. So that's one example of dying to self. It's an opportunity that God gave to die. He followed in his Lord's footsteps. But what opportunities has he given to you or to me? Have we, are we, will we take those opportunities to die to self? Verse 25, whoever loves his life will lose it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. It's worth mentioning before we finish that some people take this whole concept too far. It's not about purging yourself of every pleasure. It's not about hating every moment of life. That's not what this verse means. Look at Jesus. Jesus died to self, but Jesus also laughed. He had a drink or two. He went to parties. He was a social animal. It's not about choosing to rid yourself of all enjoyment. It's about priorities. It's about living but not grabbing. It's about enjoying your plenty but making sure that you share it. It's about stewarding but not hoarding. Sometimes sacrificing so that somebody else can have what they need. Quay once said, "I have learned to hold all things loosely so that God will not have to pry them out of my hands." The things that I own, the things that you own, will God have to pry them from our hands? Or do we hold them lightly, as Quay suggested? So Jesus loved to chat, he loved to raise a glass and recline with friends. He enjoyed a social gathering. But Jesus also got down on his knees and he cleaned his friends' feet of the muck and the cattle poo that would have been on the streets. Jesus spent time in the company of people that nobody else would allow to darken their door or other people were repelled or repulsed by. Verse 26, if anyone serves me, they must follow me. And where I am, there will be my servant also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. Every true follower of Jesus faces exactly the same choice today. Take the way of the cross or choose our own way. The clock has chimed. The hour has come. You and I have to decide. Amen.